This is Korea. Without borders, from far above, it stretches across nearly 100,000 square miles of land. Wide stretches of mountains and farmland, unmarred by decades of conflict, split the sparkling Yellow Sea. But Korea is not without borders. Although this is a video about South Korea, so much of their identity is defined in contrast to their neighbors to the north. When Korea was split in two by the Second World War along the 38th parallel, families were separated as well, and most have made no contact since then. How does this strain affect the population? Let's find out. Friction between the two sides erupted in the 3-year Korean War, known as the Fatherland Liberation War in North Korea, that essentially existed exclusively to give the US and Soviet Union something else to bicker about, at the cost of millions of Korean lives. All to barely change the border and sign an armistice that has officially kept the conflict open ever since. Contrary to their current existence, at the close of the Korean War, it was South Korea that found themselves in abject poverty. General Douglas MacArthur famously said of the nation, "This country has no future. This country will not be restored even after 100 years. And who could blame him? Though the South had barely a quarter of its land available for farming, 40% of their total economy was based on agriculture, and 25% of that relied entirely on the farming of rice. So how did South Korea change its economy so rapidly from one that found value in rice production to one that produces a large amount of the world's cell phones, televisions, and automobiles? The transformation began in 1960, when previous President Yun Po-sun was violently overthrown by Park Chung-hee. The new leadership officially took effect after 2 years of leadership under acting President Yun Po-sun. President Hee made two major changes to the economy under the umbrella of a multitude of changes known as the First 5-Year Economic Plan. The first was to provide funding and backing to companies that were successful and represented the country well, in turn becoming interlinked with the government in something called a kaibol. The second was to switch the focus of trade from imports to exports, and begin to focus on growing the nation's wealth by producing goods not only to survive, but to leave a mark on world trade. The first 5-year economic plan was a huge success, creating a meteoric rise in GDP for South Korea through President Hee's rule. The explosion of industry began with textiles and moved towards defense and chemical sales, but the largest and most important industry change was the technological sector. Today, the kaibol of Samsung alone makes up about 1/5 of South Korea's entire economy, while the agriculture that was once so dominant now represents less than 5%. But how have a select number of companies relished in consistent growth with almost no outside competition from upstart entrepreneurs? When President Hee made his enormous changes to the economy, he also brought about forced change to the culture of South Korea as well. Though President Hee was democratically elected and bared the moniker of a democratic leader, he ruled in some ways like a dictatorship, going as far as organizing a self-coup against his own government after very nearly losing a national election. President Hee set strict rules against the use of Chinese languages and promoted other nationalist agendas. The homeless were cleaned off the streets, not by implementation of labor programs, but by picking them up en route to work essentially as slaves in work camps. In spite of all this, President Hee is widely regarded in South Korea today as their greatest ruler ever. This is due to South Korea's relatively high power distance, 50% higher than the US, and the nationalism that President Hee began installing in the 1960s. Nationalism only heightened by their proximity to a bona fide nuclear power. This aspect of South Korea's culture is present in their formal education as well. Students are placed under incredible pressure to perform for their country, pressure that regularly results in top 5 global test scores, but also some of the highest suicide rates in the developed world. But when the students make it through the rigor of their education systems, they typically do not wish to innovate as an entrepreneur on their own, but rather reinforce the kaibols and their symbiotic relationship with the government. The dream for many is to establish themselves as a middle manager in the monolithic Samsung. This is not to say there is no entrepreneurial spirit across all industries, however. Unlike the technology industry, service industries are largely made up of small businesses, and it's actually become a bit of an issue. In fact, about 20% of all houses in South Korea are currently being used as collateral for debt that finances a small, self-operated business. This is a huge problem for the country. If the housing market were to become devalued, or if a large number of small businesses started to become less profitable, a huge amount of debt would be defaulted on. One possible solution to this problem would be an app that encourages cooperation between multiple families to invest in small businesses together. This, by the way, would have been impossible before 2015, when crowdfunding was made legal by the South Korean government. For our purposes, this signifies an early market with many niches unfilled. So many of the incredibly risky small business plans are identical to tens or hundreds of others across the city. Fried chicken, for example, became such a popular idea in the last decade that the government has been forced to limit the number allowed to open. What if 2 or 3 of these families could pool their financial means and industry knowledge to finance one collective small business? Risk for the individual would go down, yes, but more importantly, so would the risk for a mass default. This app would allow families or individuals to search through categories of interest to them, to post and reply to listings that summarize someone's goals and interests in a potential business. Lastly, the app would seek to facilitate conversation between users to help them jumpstart their small enterprise. The social media potential of the app is also a very serious marketing opportunity. The 3 most popular apps in South Korea are all messaging or social apps, and by partnering with those apps to use their messaging systems, the app could have a much greater reach. And that reach is very important, because the idea of collaboration works best when they have a large and varied group of users. So business professionals can find chefs with skills they can sell, or artists can find an expert on real estate to place their pop-up shop in the best neighborhood. Until that group is captured, however, it's important for the app to hit the ground running, seeking out business owners who are dangerously low on capital, and demonstrating the app's ability to raise more. Once the app has nurtured a solid user base, there are 2 basic paths of monetization. The first option is monthly costs paid by the users for the ability to use the service that the application provides. Or the second option could be used, claiming a fraction of the equity in a company that was formed because of the capabilities of the app. Possible benefits of the app are far beyond monetary. Along with the already established benefits of risk reduction, this concept has the potential to affect another one of South Korea's growing threats: reduce social interaction and decrease birth rates. Increased universality of cell phones and instant messaging have long been thought to hold heavy ramifications for social behavior and birth rates, and this is especially true in South Korea. The birth rate is currently at a record low, below 1, a full 2/3 less than the birth rate just 30 years ago. This app concept, unlike most social applications, explicitly serves to connect people for interactions in real life. And unlike a dating site, which can continue to be a social detriment while ostensibly making real-world connections, this app seeks to create real collaborations and foster a more collectivist mindset among the business-oriented. And collaborations are exactly what Korea as a whole can use for the foreseeable future. South Korea today, though a global world power, still seems to be balanced on the edge of the knife that cut the peninsula in 2 5 decades ago. Economic and cultural policies that spurred on a miracle for the country have evolved and currently pose a threat to the wealth, autonomy, and social ability of the country. South Korea must evolve with them.